For most people, Sun Tzu is a name tied to battlefields, generals, and the endless memes about strategy shared by entrepreneurs who have never actually read his work. He's often painted as a philosopher of victory, a mysterious sage who unlocked the secrets of human conflict. But that portrayal misses the deeper truth entirely. Because when you peel back the slogans, the catchy quotes, and the legend, something far more profound emerges. Sun Tzu wasn't obsessed with glory, honor, or even winning battles. What truly consumed him was cost, the hidden price of every decision, the unseen burden that followed every campaign. In a world constantly torn apart by endless war, Sun Tzu recognized a truth that rulers then and even now struggle to grasp. The real danger to a state isn't the army it faces, but the debt and depletion that war leaves behind. Most people assume the art of war is about fighting. It isn't. It's about finance, efficiency, and survival. Welcome to Capital D Code, where history, money, and power collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it seems. For centuries, the history of China was a story written in blood and coin. To understand Sun Tzu's brilliance, you first have to understand the time he lived in, a period when kingdoms were as fragile as their treasuries. The late spring and autumn period into the early warring states era, roughly the 6th to 5th centuries BCE, was a landscape of fractured territories, each believing it could dominate the others, each spending recklessly to try. Kings mobilized armies that were no longer measured in hundreds of warriors, but tens of thousands, all requiring food, horses, metal, wagons, armorers, cooks, and porters. Every campaign was not just a test of martial prowess, it was a financial experiment. A balance sheet stretched to its breaking point. Each march drained resources, each siege depleted the treasury, and each delay multiplied the cost of victory. In this chaotic chessboard, Sun Tzu appeared not as a philosopher in quiet reflection, but as a strategist forced to solve an economic crisis dressed up as war. Most Western interpretations of ancient warfare focus on heroism, tactics, and valor. But in Sun Tzu's China, logistics came first. A single army moving hundreds of miles required meticulous accounting. Grain had to be stockpiled, weapons forged, and supply lines secured. A month-long campaign could bankrupt a minor kingdom, a year-long campaign could topple an empire, and yet these states kept fighting, trapped in a cycle of insecurity. Armies expanded, alliances fractured, and the political system strained under the weight of continual mobilization. Sun Tzu saw all this with clarity. He realized that the enemy in front of a ruler was often the least of their worries. The real threat came from overextension, the hidden debts, the uncounted losses, the invisible cost of trying to win at any price. Victory, he understood, was meaningless if the state itself went bankrupt in the process. Sun Tzu's genius was that he reframed war entirely. He didn't view it as a glorious stage for heroes. He viewed it as a ledger. Every decision on the battlefield was a financial choice. Would marching today cost more than the value of the target? Could a month-long siege deplete resources faster than it yielded strategic gain? Should armies use enemy resources rather than stretch their own supply lines? This mindset was revolutionary. While others saw honor or courage, Sun Tzu saw opportunity cost. While generals chased glory, he calculated risk. He asked the questions that rulers rarely did. What does this war require? How resilient is the state? Can the treasury survive another campaign? And so the foundation of the art of war is not philosophy or mysticism, but finance. When he famously wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting," he was articulating a principle of fiscal prudence. Avoiding battle was not cowardice. It was the most effective way to preserve resources. When he warned that no nation has ever benefited from prolonged warfare, he stated a literal truth. The longer a campaign drags on, the more it erodes the very capacity of a state to function. Efficiency, intelligence, deception, and speed were not merely tactical preferences. They were cost-saving measures. Every choice Sun Tzu advocated was about minimizing waste, maximizing leverage, and ensuring the survival of the kingdom. He observed with piercing insight that traditional warfare had become economically suicidal. Where once noble elites fought ritualized duels for honor, now the scale of armies and weaponry made that impossible. Populations were growing, weapons evolving. and war had transformed into a national project, a financial enterprise whose mismanagement could mean the collapse of entire dynasties. Sun Tzu treated war as a ledger: resources expended, supply chains strained, opportunity costs calculated centuries before such concepts existed in modern economics. Generals obsessed with glory were, in his eyes, reckless debtors, gambling the state's future on personal pride. Every failed siege, every mismanaged campaign, was a step toward insolvency. When you read The Art of War through the lens of economics, the structure of the book becomes strikingly practical. Sun Tzu begins with the 5 factors: moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline. At first glance, these appear philosophical, even poetic. But beneath the language lies a simple truth: these are resource variables. The moral law measures the cohesion of people. Heaven accounts for timing and seasons. Earth covers terrain and supply lines. The commander's wisdom ensures efficient decision-making. And method and discipline govern logistics and administration. Sun Tzu was asking not how to inspire warriors, but how to maintain a state capable of sustaining prolonged campaigns. Each factor is a line item on the kingdom's balance sheet, a predictor of solvency in the face of conflict. Sun Tzu devotes enormous attention to logistics because he understood that armies are expensive. Moving troops consumes grain faster than paying soldiers, and maintaining forces in the field depletes agricultural labor at home. Distance multiplies cost. Prolonged engagements accelerate financial exposure. He urges commanders to use enemy resources whenever possible, not for convenience but out of necessity. A general who draws on the opponent's grain, equipment, or labor is, in modern terms, outsourcing risk and reducing capital outlay. By contrast, leaders who extend campaigns for personal honor are fiscal catastrophes, draining their nations while chasing symbolic victories. In Sun Tzu's framework, logistics are strategy, intelligence is leverage, and deception is cost avoidance. Every action is measured against its financial consequences. Intelligence, in particular, reveals his forward-thinking economic reasoning. Spies, scouts, and informants are treated as investments with high ROI. The cost of one operative may prevent millions in wasted expenditure. Foreknowledge, he emphasizes, allows rulers to act decisively without committing unnecessary resources. Speed and maneuverability are praised not for aggression, but for efficiency. Moving swiftly where the enemy does not expect you reduces supply strain, avoids attrition, and preserves capital. Flexibility, adaptability. And psychological tactics are not philosophical flourishes but deliberate measures to minimize expenditure, while maximizing effect. Even diplomacy, alliances, and misdirection are framed as financial strategies. A campaign that achieves objectives without battle conserves resources. Generals who win through negotiation or intimidation are not passive. They are economically astute. Sun Tzu's ultimate principle is opportunity cost. Every choice closes the door to cheaper alternatives. War should never be romanticized. It should be calculated, controlled, and minimized. Excess is ruin. A state that loses battles but preserves its treasury can recover. A state that wins battles while bankrupting itself is lost. History proves his logic. States that applied his principles survived longer, striking efficiently, exploiting enemy resources, and avoiding protracted sieges. States that ignored him burned out, squandering wealth on drawn-out engagements. Sun Tzu's genius lay not in predicting specific battles, but in codifying timeless rules of fiscal prudence in the context of warfare. Sun Tzu's insights resonate far beyond ancient China. The principle that financial mismanagement leads to strategic collapse can be observed in conflicts across centuries. Modern states still struggle with the same errors he highlighted. The Soviet Union in Afghanistan, the United States in Vietnam, and the drawn-out sieges of World War I are vivid examples. In each case, armies were not defeated solely by enemies in the field, but by the invisible pressure of unsustainable costs. Treasury depletion, supply failures, and overstretched resources dictated outcomes far more than courage or technology. Sun Tzu would have recognized the pattern immediately. Prolonged engagement erodes the state faster than the enemy ever could. The tools Sun Tzu advocated remain foundational today. intelligence gathering, covert operations, proxy engagements, cyber strategy, and sanctions are all modern applications of his philosophy. Achieve maximum effect with minimal financial exposure. Speed, deception, and calculated pressure are preferred over brute force. National power is no longer measured solely in soldiers or weapons, but in economic resilience, the capacity to absorb shocks, sustain operations, and recover. Military budgets, debt burdens, resource dependencies, supply chain fragility are today's battlefield equivalents of the logistical constraints Sun Tzu meticulously accounted for. His core lesson is clear: victory is irrelevant if it bankrupts the state. Success is measured not by cities taken or armies destroyed, but by the preservation of resources, stability, and long-term solvency. Generals who win without fighting, rulers who avoid waste, and states that calculate the true cost of action are the ones that endure. The art of war, read through this lens, becomes a manual not of aggression but of stewardship. Sun Tzu's philosophy teaches restraint, discipline, foresight, timeless principles of power management that extend far beyond the battlefield. States that recognize war as an economic instrument survive. Those that treat it as a test of honor or brute strength fail. History confirms this logic repeatedly. Sun Tzu's genius lies in connecting warfare to finance, showing that the greatest victories are achieved not by striking hardest, but by striking smartly and sparingly. In the end, his message is as relevant now as it was 2,500 years ago. Strategic success begins with financial wisdom, and the cost of miscalculation is more deadly than any enemy. The deeper insight, the one most people completely overlook, is that Sun Tzu wasn't trying to teach rulers how to win every battle. He was teaching them how to safeguard the long-term stability of their state. His true brilliance lay in recognizing that the cost of conflict always outlasts the clash itself. Nations do not crumble simply because they lose skirmishes. They crumble because they exhaust the capital, resources, and trust that hold them together. In Sun Tzu's perspective, victory is meaningless if the treasury collapses in its wake. The most successful campaigns are those that leave the state intact, resilient, and ready for the next challenge. Viewed through this lens, the art of war transforms completely. It is not a manual on courage, aggression, or conquering foes. It is a guide to restraint, prudence, and enduring influence. Its lessons are not about overpowering opponents, but about outlasting them. Sun Tzu does not celebrate conquest. He celebrates stability. The ruler who preserves resources is wiser than the ruler who seizes cities. The general who achieves objectives without bloodshed is wiser than the general who destroys armies. And the nation that exercises restraint is stronger than the one that acts impulsively, driven by pride or passion. Sun Tzu's philosophy is not that of a warrior. It is the philosophy of a steward, a leader tasked with ensuring the long-term solvency, security, and resilience of the state. His financial genius is inseparable from his strategic thinking. He understood that economics and power are intertwined, and that the miscalculation of cost is a far greater threat than any enemy army. His message is timeless, sobering, and endlessly relevant. True strength is measured not by the force you can deploy, but by what you can afford to deploy sustainably. History repeatedly demonstrates that when economic systems collapse, it is not the bravest or most aggressive nation that prevails, but the one that maintains financial discipline above all else. History doesn't repeat, but ignoring its lessons can be just as costly. If this perspective gave you a new way to look at strategy, power, and history, subscribe now. Knowledge has always been the ultimate advantage, and I'll show you exactly where to find it.